So this is my opportunity to give something to someone else because I want to just practice the art of giving, and it just feels good. So today I want to give what I think is the best thing I have to give right now in my life, which is a free lesson on hormones. So a lot of people get confused about hormones, not really explained very well. There's a lot of them, and I think I can do a pretty good job of sort of helping someone organize that and thinking about it. And so we're not going to go over the whole thing, but we're going to start with the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So if this is our hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is a really important structure, right, in biology, in the brain. So it's involved in sleep regulation, it's involved in hunger regulation, it's involved in sex drive, and a bunch of other vital functions, right? So hypothalamus, very important. And then hanging off of the hypothalamus is this thing called the pituitary gland, right? And so here is the anterior pituitary gland. And here is the posterior pituitary gland. And they're derived from different tissues. So the anterior pituitary gland is actually derived from the roof of the mouth, whereas the posterior pituitary gland is derived from the brain. So this is a more glandular structure, whereas this is a neural structure. And that is important because the structure of this is just cells. So there's just cells in here, we call them parenchymal cells, that just make hormones. And then over here, the cell body, let's use a different color, the cell body is actually up here, and then the axon projects down. So this is like the Neuer hypothesis, for example, right? That's what it's called. So neural tissue versus glandular parenchymal tissue. So in the anterior pituitary, we make and secrete 7 hormones. Make plus secrete 7 hormones. In the posterior pituitary, we don't make any, right? Because the hormones are made up here in the cell bodies of the neurons, the soma, right? That's where the nucleus is, that's where things are made. And then the hormone is trafficked down and then released. So here we secrete 2. And there's actually more hormones than this, but these are the major ones that I'm focusing on right now. So one key part of this, what's happening here, is something called the hypothalamic portal system. And what a portal system is it's 2 capillary beds in series. So this is a capillary bed, then there's a direct artery, and then another capillary bed. And so that's really rare. So we're going to call this the hypothalamic pituitary portal system. So it's 2 capillary beds in series, and what that allows for is it allows for hormones in the hypothalamus to directly cause the release of hormones in the anterior pituitary without having to send those hormones throughout the entire body and then come back and have an effect here. So that's cool. It only happens one other place in the body, and that's the liver. So there's a capillary bed in the intestines, and then a capillary bed in the liver, and there's a direct line to those. So you directly absorb stuff, and then it goes to the liver to be detoxified in case you ate anything weird, like alcohol, for example. Okay, so that's the basic structure there. Now let's go over the hormones themselves. So we have hypothalamus, we have anterior pituitary, and then we have we'll call periphery. So we love mnemonics in biology, mnemonic devices to help us remember stuff. And to help us remember the anterior pituitary hormones, we have a great mnemonic called flat peg. So that's F-L-A-T-P E, G. Flat peg. So I'm not going to write out the names of the hormones. You're just going to have to bear with me. So it's follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid-stimulating hormone, prolactin. E is going to stand for endorphins, which are endogenous opioids, and then growth hormone. So as I said before, there are hormones in the hypothalamus that get released, and then they cause the release of hormones in the anterior pituitary. So that is called a tropic hormone. So a hormone causing the release of another hormone is a tropic hormone. And so that's what we have in the hypothalamus. So these first two hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, those hormones affect the gonads. So this hypothalamic hormone is gonadotropic releasing hormone. So gonadotropic releasing hormone stimulates FSH and LH release from the anterior pituitary. Now these two hormones affect the gonads, and so they'll have different effects in men versus women. So we'll start with the effects on men first. So, and this is my symbol for men. So for men, follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates Sertoli, or sustenacular cells. So we're going to keep it really simple here and just write Sertoli. So follicle-stimulating hormone in men stimulates Sertoli cells, and these Sertoli cells sustain sperm. So these Sertoli cells are in the tubules in which sperm get made, and they release like fructose and stuff, or nutrition and stuff, and help the sperm grow, like molecules that support sperm growth. Follicle-stimulating hormone in women, my symbol for women, does what the hormone is named for. So it stimulates the follicle. Now I have to talk a little bit about the follicle. So the follicle is the egg cell and all the cells surrounding the egg cell. So remember, the human egg cell is the biggest cell in the body by far, something like 50,000 mitochondria in that cell. So it needs a ton of support. It needs a whole support structure. So in the ovary, you have this giant egg cell that's going to become a baby, and then surrounding it, you have all these little cells supporting. And that whole structure, the egg cell and all the little cells supporting, that's the follicle. So FSH stimulates the growth of that follicle. So that follicle starts growing early in the menstrual cycle, right? Day 1 or 2. And so follicle-stimulating hormone during that time will increase, right? And then the follicle will grow. Now, interestingly, as the follicle grows, those supporting cells around the follicle secrete estrogens. So estrogens will be released as the follicle grows. So estrogen will also be increasing, especially in the first couple days of the menstrual cycle. Luteinizing hormone has a different effect. So in men, luteinizing hormone stimulates Leydig cells, or interstitial cells of Leydig. And Leydig cells make testosterone. So notice we have FSH from Sertoli cells, which sustain sperm, so a lot of S's. And then we have luteinizing hormone for Leydig cells, which make testosterone. There's no L in testosterone, unfortunately. But you see the S's and the L's sort of go together there. And then in women, luteinizing hormone causes ovulation. So you get what's called the LH surge. So LH surges, and that developing follicle gets released from the ovary into the fallopian tube. But what happens is the surrounding cells actually stay behind. So what gets ovulated is the ovum cell and some of those surrounding cells, but some of the surrounding cells stay behind in the ovary and create what's called the corpus luteum. corpus luteum gets created, and the corpus luteum then secretes progesterone. Okay, so progesterone increases after ovulation, like day 15, 16 of the menstrual cycle, if you're going by like the classic menstrual cycle where ovulation always happens on day 14, which is of course not the case. Okay, so those are our gonadotropins, right? So we have gonadotropin releasing hormone, FSH, LH, and they're affecting the gonads, right? Leydig cells in the testes, Sertoli cells in the testes, the follicles in the ovary, and then ovulation obviously occurs in the ovary as well. Okay, so gonadotropins, these two guys. Adrenocorticotropic hormone does exactly what it sounds like it does. It goes to the adrenal cortex and it acts like a tropic hormone. So remember, a tropic hormone, this was gonadotropin releasing hormone. A tropic hormone causes the release of another hormone. So adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to go to the adrenal cortex and cause the release of hormones there. What gets released from the adrenal cortex? Well, that's a great question. So let's zoom in now on the adrenal cortex. So first look at this word, adrenal. So in like Latin or Greek or whatever, some old language, ad means above. So what this means is the above renal gland or the above the kidney gland. That's all it is. So we have this gland sitting above the kidney. Now it has a cortex and it has medulla. So cortex, the hormones made there are going to be released by this hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? Adrenal cortex tropic hormone. And so what are those hormones? They are salt, sugar, and sex. All right? So here's another mnemonic for you. It feels better as you go deeper. So as you go deeper into the adrenal cortex, you get to the sex hormones, right? So the idea is like sugar is better than salt and sex is better than sugar, right? So it feels better as you go deeper. So what do these names correspond to? So it's kind of, this is tricky, and I think that most people don't really see this. So these are from the cortex. They're corticoids, right? We call them corticoid hormones. They're corticoids. So if you're affecting salt is a mineral, right? So this is mineralocorticoids. If you're affecting sugar, you're affecting glucose, right? We call it glucose in biology. So this is glucocorticoid. Corticoid. And then sex hormones are just estrogen and testosterone. So in men, so men have estrogen, that comes from here, the adrenal cortex. And women have testosterone, that also comes from here, the adrenal cortex. Right, and so the mineralocorticoid that we're most interested in usually is aldosterone. Right, this increases sodium reabsorption in the collecting duct. And then glucocorticoid, this is cortisol. This is our stress hormone. So I just want to point out that you may have heard of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So that's what we're talking about here. So you get stressed, you see it, you sense it, the sensation comes into your body through your brain, into your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is a very primal structure, right? So you don't really have a lot of conscious control over what's happening there. So hypothalamus reacts immediately, releases ATCH. ATCH goes to the adrenal cortex and you release cortisol, the stress hormone. So this is sort of the end product of the stress that you had perceived over here. So you perceive the stress, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis gets activated. Now you have this stress hormone, and then that's like not good for your health over time. Though it is good for your health in like short term. If you're stressed, stress is not necessarily bad, right? Cool. So that's that. Let's talk about the medulla for a second. So the medulla, the adrenal medulla, is again a totally different embryonic structure. So again, this is glandular. Like the anterior pituitary is glandular, whereas this central structure is neural. Right? So again, we have a glandular and neural structure, just like we had here, glandular versus neural, and different embryonic origin. So here we get the release of catecholamines. And the catecholamines that get released here are epinephrine, so this is also called adrenaline in colloquially, and then norepinephrine as well. And so these catecholamines are released when you've activated the sympathetic nervous system. So when you're running for your life, right? When you see a tiger, you're running for your life, you release epinephrine, your lungs dilate, your heart rate increases, you're ready to fight, flight, right? Ready to run or ready to fight. So that's the catecholamines released from the adrenal medulla. So you have adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone. So we have a couple steps here. So we have the thyroid releasing hormone, and that stimulates thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone then stimulates the thyroid, and the thyroid releases thyroid hormone. So we write that as T3 or T4. I think T3 is the one that's active, but both get released. So that's relatively simple. Now, what happens with the thyroid in humans is our immune system likes to attack our thyroid, right? So our immune system will attack our thyroid, our own immune system, and we'll get hypothyroid, right? Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or we'll get hypothyroid, so low thyroid hormone. So then the question is, what happens to the levels of thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid releasing hormone in someone who's hypothyroid? The answer is the levels of thyroid stimulating hormone go up, right? Because at every level, and this is true throughout, at every level here, we have feedback inhibition to control, to make sure things aren't, levels of hormones aren't running wild. We always have tightly controlled feedback inhibition. So what happens when the immune system attacks the thyroid is that thyroid hormone will go down, and you won't have this inhibition anymore, this feedback inhibition. So levels of thyroid stimulating hormone will go way up, right? And that makes sense, and that's actually how it's diagnosed clinically. If you think you have a patient with low thyroid hormone, you'll test levels of thyroid stimulating hormone. If they're high, then you have really high suspicion. Great. So interestingly, thyroid releasing hormone also stimulates prolactin, which is responsible for milk production in the mammary glands, right? And so it's also interesting that some men, not all men, but some men do have some mammary glands and breast tissue that can make milk. So hypothyroid, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, autoimmune disease in general, is more common in women. But in men, when they get hypothyroid, they usually don't go to the doctor because the symptoms are depression, you get cold, your hair starts falling out, and men are just unlikely to go to the doctor in general, right? So a man will be like, I'm not depressed, I can tough it up, there's nothing wrong with me, even though they're just like super pissed off at everyone and hate their life. But men will go to the doctor if they start spontaneously lactating, right? So that's usually how hypothyroidism presents clinically. So you have a man come into your office and he says, doctor, there's milk coming out of my nipples. And usually the cause is autoimmune thyroid disease. And that's because of this crosstalk here with thyroid releasing hormone. Right? So you have the low thyroid, you get no more feedback inhibition, you have really high levels of thyroid releasing hormone, and then that's causing way increased levels of prolactin demand, and you can start spontaneously lactating. So that's a cool just like intro to medicine there. Endorphins, endogenous opioids, they get released when you're having like a really amazing time. You get like, that's when you feel like high, like natural high or whatever, like going out dancing or something. If you dance for like 3 hours, you're gonna feel like amazing. And then growth hormone, releasing hormone, stimulates growth hormone, and this just helps you grow. It's not very interesting. Well, it is, but we're not going to cover it right now. Okay, great. So that is the hypothalamic pituitary axis for the anterior pituitary. Now we just have a couple more loose ends to clean up. With the posterior pituitary, we'll just do that over here. So posterior pituitary, we said it secretes two hormones. They're made in the hypothalamus. They are oxytocin. So oxytocin is the love hormone. So they did this study in voles, I think, and voles like mate for life or something like that. And so the stronger the pair bond between the vole, or some mate for life and some are promiscuous, the ones that mated for life had higher levels of oxytocin, whereas the ones that were promiscuous had lower levels. So oxytocin is key in forming that pair bond. And of course, humans form strong connections with each other. So we release a lot of oxytocin. That's love, right? Love is when you're just like overwhelmed with like connection with someone. That's all the oxytocin in your body. So we can say oxytocin's functions. Love. Another function of oxytocin is milk letdown. So remember, prolactin is milk production, whereas oxytocin is milk letdown, right? And so, so those are two different things. And then also uterine contractions in birth. So how do we tie all this together? Well, during the birthing process, what's happening is the baby's head is pushing on the cervix. And that stimulates, neurologically, that stimulates the release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary. That oxytocin causes more uterine contractions. The baby's head pushes more on the cervix, you get more release of oxytocin. So this is an example of a feed-forward process, right? So, and that's what birth is. You know, you want to complete it to the end. Right, you have this feed-forward process of more oxytocin, more oxytocin, more oxytocin, more oxytocin, more oxytocin, and then finally the birth happens. Then what? Then you can get spontaneous lactation, because you have so much oxytocin, and also love, right? So now your baby's right in front of you, you're holding your baby, build that strong, immediate, strong connection between the mother and the child. So oxytocin from the posterior pituitary, and then something called antidiuretic hormone, also called vasopressin. So this one is not that interesting. It's not as interesting as oxytocin. This one, ready for this? Increases the number of aquaporins in the collecting duct. So the collecting duct is in the kidney, right? So when you increase the number of aquaporins in the collecting duct, what you're doing is you're making that collecting duct more permeable to water. So water can then come back into the body. So when you have a lot of ADH, you're reabsorbing a lot of water, so you're dehydrated. So it's antidiuretic hormone, right? So you're not peeing a lot when you have a lot of ADH. So you're reabsorbing all that water, and you'll be urinating with a concentrated urine. Now, alcohol inhibits the release of antidiuretic hormone. So that causes you to just pee out a ton of water, and you get dehydrated when you drink, thus hangover. So That's oxytocin and ADH from the posterior pituitary. So we talked about the hypothalamus. We talked about the difference between the anterior pituitary. We talked about tropic hormones in this portal system. There's only one other one that's between the gut and the liver. And then we talked about the different hormones in the anterior pituitary flat peg, the different hormones in the hypothalamus, their function throughout the body. Now, another key thing I just want to mention at the end here, so we have 3 types of hormones on the board. Most of them are called peptide, so they're amino acid based. Some of them, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and then these corticoids, aldosterone, cortisol, these are steroid hormones. Steroid hormones means they're derived from cholesterol. And so because they're derived from cholesterol, they can pass through cell membranes, which means the receptor for these steroid hormones is going to be inside of the cell. And so these steroid hormones can directly affect transcription translation and have a slow onset but long duration effect. Whereas a peptide hormone, all the other hormones, those can't directly enter the cell. So their receptors on the surface of the cell, so they're going to affect cellular metabolism through something like a G protein coupled receptor, which will affect, which will usually act through a second messenger system and affect metabolism, and maybe over the long term affect some sort of something at the transcription translational level. So peptide hormones are going to have a fast effect, but it's going to not last very long, right? And then the third type are these catecholamines down here, which are sort of a hybrid. T3, T4 is an exception. So T3, T4 actually has peptides in it, but it acts like a steroid hormone. So its receptor is intracellular. So remember, thyroid hormone is an exception to the sort of peptide steroid rule there. And then catecholamines also are more like peptides. Their receptors are extracellular.